To kick things off officially, this is the kickoff of our guest speaker spotlight series for Each One Teach One Mentorship, a program that's curated and facilitated by 509 School of Hip Hop with the help of London Arts Council, Cape Grant, and other participating artists and artist educators. So the goal of this initiative is to connect with like-minded individuals representing the BIPOC communities and greater, practicing or appreciating any sort of art form that has come to existence from Black culture, such as hip hop. And for us, hip hop really is used as a main tool, as a voice, as a medium to connect with all these individuals across the community. So I felt it was important for us to keep talking about it, to educate one another about where we're at right now in dealing with the pandemic and dealing with our own personal, struggles, whether it's mental challenges or physical stress from dancing 6 days out of the week. Like, it can be fun, but it does take a toll on the body. So like, we have to keep these things in mind. But I really wanted to just expand on that and just get everybody else involved in these conversations on the journey. So we have Leroy to kick off guest speaker conversation to speak more on the art of building cultural and racial communities. So myself and many of us have met Leroy at various community events, speaking on very important issues such as anti-racism, ending bullying, and any sort of ways to positively influence the next generation. So with hip hop education and mentorship in mind, I didn't have to look further to look for continued inspiration and words of wisdom. So I want to welcome you, Leroy, and maybe you can tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you're looking forward to in being part of this Each One Teach One initiative.
Thank you so much, Jim, for having me. It's a privilege and a pleasure. It's wonderful. Just a brief, intro of myself. As you know, my name is Leroy Hibbert. My birth name is actually Corey. When I was born, my mother and my father changed my name to Leroy to reflect my dad. And so I have a beautiful wife. Her name is Helen. And I've got a beautiful daughter as well named Deja Moore. And she's married to a wonderful man named Jeffrey. And we have 2 grandchildren now, Lincoln and Lucas. So we all reside here locally in the city here. And I also, in addition to that, I'm employed at an organization called LUSO Community Services. And it's a multicultural, multi-ethnic organization. And we do a number of different programs dealing with the holistic approach to dealing with humanity. So that's somewhat of a quick synopsis.
Yes. Always, like directly involved in the work that is needed in the community. So we're getting a chance to get to know you and your backstory a little bit. And, one of the main purposes of these conversations is to get deeper into like the origin story, I call it. We could say like, was there a particular event or a person that really helped in sparking that decision to decide that I want to go into this field to continue my work and learn more? So we would love to get further into those points of your life, if that is okay. And we do encourage and welcome everyone to join in on any questions you may have in the comments. You could do the raise hand and all these things formally too. But also just feel free to take in anything that is being shared and reflect on that, as that is super valuable. So let's get into a little bit of the specifics, right? Like when it comes to high school, years, to try to look for what the next big step is as a young adult. I think I personally, because I was still fairly new to Canada, having born and raised in South Korea, I was still dealing with that in terms of identity crisis. Like, this is my 5th year in this country, and I have to like decide if I want to be an engineer like my dad would have wished, or I just found out about this breaking thing and hip hop and I want to, So I think everyone has those sort of instances where you're starting to doubt like your capabilities. Do you get to wonder, like, am I destined to do this kind of job maybe 10 years down the road? So do you remember like maybe specifically during high school years before graduating, contemplating like whether this was going to be a set route for myself or I need to do a little digging and gaining more experience to make a big decision on like, this is what I would love to devote my time and effort to?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. You know, life without purpose is a study of chaos and an exercise in frustration. And so I was actually, by a gentleman that was from Miles Monroe, but I was actually in high school when I went to high school here. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do because I knew growing up in life, it's interesting the way in the world that we're living in, we've been cultured to compete and compare and not necessarily connect. And so, you know, going to high school, you know, I had friends, I was really into athletics. I played basketball, I did track, I did soccer, I did volleyball, just really trying to get engaged and really developing relationships and friendships with people that did not necessarily look like me. But noticing when I went to school, there's a lot of people that did not look like me. So in this sort of way of trying to figure out what I wanted to do, I did not know exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to work with people. I wasn't necessarily an IT person, a tech person. I wasn't working at the bank, wasn't for me. I wasn't a numbers person. That was not my frame of reference. But I noticed in my journey in high school, I was really able to, I was one of the people that I always wanted to be the peacemaker. You know, I didn't like conflict a lot. I didn't like people getting into arguments, that sort of thing. Disagreements, people do have that because of the personalities of people that you're interacting with, but it can explode into something that's quite violent. And that wasn't my take. I want to kind of work with people. And even if it's something that's very simple, just being there for a friend and listening. Because in high school, I mean, people go through a lot of stuff, a lot of things that they're engaged in, family issues, you know, friendships. And I was able to be an ear for people. And I noticed that I enjoyed that because you can listen to people, but you still necessarily can't hear them sometimes. And I want to make space for that for individuals, no matter what race or ethnicity they were. And then from that, in our conversations, I was talking about, you know, things that were actually important to me as far as social justice issues. I don't know, it just kind of came up out of me, through me, to other people in somewhat of a non-threatening way. And so going through high school, I went to college, went to Fanshawe College, and I took a recreation leadership program. Still didn't know exactly what I wanted to pinpoint myself into, but I knew I wanted to work with youth, young adults to that degree. And a lot of things start to unfold for me in that particular environment. And from there, I actually, very quickly, I was actually volunteering at an organization. A friend of mine, apparently, to backtrack, when I was done high school and going into college, on Saturday mornings, before I got married, my sort of, if you want to say tradition, I'd wake up in the morning, get myself together, then I go to Western to go play pickup basketball. You know, play every Saturday and just keep on that court, man, keep on winning, right? So and then I would go to Chapters bookstore and I'd sit there by myself and just read books. And I just found that strange, but I just did it. I enjoyed it. Long story short, I had a friend of mine that said to me that there was a presentation being held at a facility and she could not make it. And she was supposed to be on a panel, but she'd asked me if I would want to do it. So I agreed to do it. And then from that, a lot of things opened up. And I guess this is why I'm here in this particular position now.
That's incredible. But I mean, like, I have to say, if it weren't for that one event where you were available and you had said yes to that opportunity, do you think it might have taken place maybe a little bit differently or a different time in your life?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I believe that. I mean, there are moments in your life, excuse me, there are moments and segments in your life that, you know, it can either go one way or another as far as where you're going. Because vision without action is a daydream, but action with no vision is a nightmare. And so what happened was I actually, because I took that opportunity, a few weeks after that, the organization that was actually overseeing that event, they were looking at hiring somebody. So I recollect the fact that, you know what, I was just supporting them, volunteering. So I went, took my resume, and I had no experience in this field. The only experience I had was my life. So I went in there and gave the director my resume, and I said, by the way, if you recall, I was actually at your event that you were hosting, and you remembered me. And he gave me an interview. They called me up, the board of directors. They called me up, and I went to the interview. And that's when I became called the Anti-Racism Education Officer. Before I was working at LUSO Community Services. It was another organization. And then that's how things start to unravel. But it was taking that opportunity and taking that risk, not knowing where it will land, but taking that opportunity because it was presented for me and seeing where that went.
Right. And I think I can sort of relate to some of those big moments where if I weren't at this one particular organization, volunteering my time to do something that I love to do, I felt passionate about, regardless of like, you know, the pay or what the next step is going to be. It just felt right for me to be in that environment. And that's when, you know, I had the opportunity to be recruited by someone who was sponsoring the event. And that would not have happened if I just looked at it more like, you know, maybe overcalculated it and just thought that like, this is not aligning with my strategic values. Then I think, you know, it would have, you know, just robbed me of that opportunity to actually connect with that individual. But I think some of us tend to be a lot more like passion driven, where you just feel it. And when you're ready, you just want to say yes and just figure out like whether it's worth it or not. And I think those are some things that I feel, you know, the next generation and the younger like adults right now who simply just have more to offer, but it may not show on a piece of resume in a traditional sense. You know, LinkedIn, or are you like, do you have the potential to go viral? Like, you know, what's your personality like that's actually, you know, worth investing in? So like, what would you say in terms of like the building experience during the crucial years, like the pre-adult life, before you decide what it is that you would like to do, whether it's a career or school, to build that experience and make yourself more open to having those opportunities where you can say, here's my resume, we connected before already, and you already kind of, you know, got a sense of who I am as a person, as an individual. So almost kind of guaranteeing yourself that spot of at least an interview.
Wow. You know, it's about preparation. A career is what you get paid for, but a calling is what you are made for. And so one of the things that people have to grapple with is you don't want to necessarily have a career connect, because a career and a calling are two different things. You know, a calling is what you're born to do. A career is what you're capable of doing in a sense. So it's all about this idea of purpose and really discovering that what is already designed inside of you. That, and everybody has a bent in one area or another that will lead them to, because when you find your purpose, your work becomes your play, right? Because I know with you, this is not work for you, you know, because right. this is what you do, right? Yeah. But it has to be something that comes from within and not necessarily coming from without. And see, when you have purpose, for myself, I believe, I heard this from a very interesting person. Purpose is when your life creates room for others to thrive. And I think that's what you're doing. And I think that's what your School of 509 School of Hip Hop is doing. And I think that's what everybody's life is supposed to be, is of service. But I guess one of the greatest things you can do is really prepare yourself. Because when preparation meets opportunity, then you will have success. And I think sometimes success, you know, it's not overnight. You know, you have to honor the process. And because we live in a world right now in a society where we can get things quite quickly. And I mean, even for example, turning on a computer, if it's not turned on or your mouse doesn't move a certain way at a certain time, we can get frustrated with that, right? But we have to be patient. We have to be patient with ourselves and patient with where we want to go. But whatever you're interested in, because for myself, I was interested in anti-racism, cultural relations. So I hung around people that had my interest. And so that could be through movies, that could be through books, that could be through individual people. But you want to surround yourself with where you want to go, with the people that are doing what you want to do. And what you want to do is glean from them, and they'll kind of help you, guide you through that particular process. but it does take a little bit of time, but you can get there. I mean, I don't think there's, it's just a journey that has to be honored. And sometimes your journey will take you one direction, but get your hands out there. I mean, get your hands out there. I mean, me working at LUSO Community Services, the organization that I work for and my director has been fantastic, and the board and the organization itself is phenomenal. They've been around for over 40 years, but my position actually fits my personality, right? So when I do my work, I'm not trying to be like anybody else. I'm not trying to compare myself to anybody else. What I do is I have maybe other people that I look at as mentors or that I gain insight from, and I make myself out of that, right? So you may see bits and parts of different people, but it's me specifically. But like I said, it does take a little bit of time.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, it can be quite exhausting and maybe not so rewarding at times for some of us when, you know, you try to be your authentic self and things don't necessarily work out. But I think that's also when things like different various art forms, you know, whether it's like sports or dance or music, that allow us to get in touch with the exploration of self and self-discovery. So, I mean, would you say, like, as a, you know, you could, of course, now, if you honestly have those like Thursday throwback nights where you put on some old school hip hop and you just jam, that's cool. But like before, did you have something that maybe was somewhat tied to different forms of expression through hip hop that helped you with sort of the creative ways to navigate through maybe work and just life in general?
Well, it's interesting because back in the day, I mean, you know, hip hop being the culture, but elements of that as far as breakdancing, MCing, you know, graffiti and all that kind of stuff. It's really interesting because, I mean, there's a movie out there that was way back called Breakin'. And then they have another old school movie called Beat Street. And then
everybody.
And what those folks did was just phenomenal on that particular screen, and how they can express themselves through music and how the body can move. You know, so what I used to do is just kind of, we'd have events actually at White Oaks Mall. There was a huge event at White Oaks Mall years ago, and it was actually a breakdancing competition. The whole mall was jacked up with people. And I went out there just to watch, because I ain't gonna go down there right now. But I went out there just to go watch, and I said, these people are tripping, man, because the mall, it was actually in the center spot. They call it center spot around, I think, in the mall area. Yeah, but it was just massive. And so what we did was, they had this breakdancing competition, and they had, I mean, guys coming out, women coming out with a jersey, and the track jersey with East End Breakers. And it was a really neat opportunity to get exercise, stay healthy, connect with people, build community, and just have a good time in a non-threatening, non-violent kind of way. And then what I used to do as well is I used to actually go and, for me, roller skating was huge. My dad took me roller skating with our whole family. He got a hold of it because my dad is from Jamaica, Kingston, Jamaica. My parents are. So roller skating wasn't necessarily a thing. But my dad found out from a friend that they went roller skating. So my dad said, let's go out as a family. He took us all out. And when I went out there, I just said, this is it. This is what I'm talking about. So I kept going. And that's where a lot of our friends met as well on a Friday night. So it wasn't necessarily just sitting in front of a television set, but it was interacting with people and talking to people, find out what the newest beat is, what the new track is, what the new dance step is, and then trying to do some stuff without hurting yourself. But it was fun, man. It was fun, man. It was fun.
That's cool. I mean, hey, those things still happen in very safe, well-facilitated environments here. We usually have all the masks up. And no, but I remember watching a video. I'm pretty sure you can look up on YouTube White Oaks Mall breakdance, like in the 80s or something like that. And it's grainy, it's VHS footage, of course. So it happened, and I remember hearing it from some of the OGs in the scene in London. And there's, like usual, the story of hip hop. There's that gap where, yeah, it died out, it died down, it's gone underground, mainstream popped, and I think when you mentioned break-in and B Street, that was the era that kind of kicked off the first wave of this, like, oh, everybody, we're about it now, right? And I think, interestingly enough, like in the last 12-ish months of the COVID, with a lot of the movement just being captured, virtually, and having that digital sense of connection, people are doing things, participating, and we get to have that access to information and tap into like very surface level of certain cultures. But I think it's also been very dangerous in terms of like maybe appropriating and just not understanding the roots and the origins of like where these things come from. And the fact that we can actually have more meaningful conversations through virtual means rather than just watching it and consuming it on the phone. So of course, like there's that a few decades of time that have passed over the years. But when it comes to experiencing culture, there's a lot to be shared and digested during these times. And I do love what you said about, building communities and staying active and connecting, right? There's a lot of competition and competing and like comparing, within the culture of hip hop in general. But I think the main like pillar of it is the community part and peace, love, unity, and having fun. So it's very interesting how things are different now, of course. It's not going to stay the same, but it still very much is a new culture, you would say too, right? And in terms of like it having started by youth who are rising against the political and social issues, do you have any advice or anything that you would maybe share with us in beneficial ways of like engaging with the youth community? Like, even though it's like virtual now, like, is there some things that really like stand out as like, yeah, this has proven to work almost every time. This is what the kids are doing now.
Yeah, I think it's just a lot of it is just listening to the young people, the youth, and getting ourselves involved in what the direction, because I think it's interesting, with the whole Black Lives Matter protest that happened in London last year, it was actually started by a few women. And one of the women called me up, who was a high school student in London. They said that they just want to do something because of the death of George Floyd and some other things pertaining to racism, that they want to get this information out. So they said they just want to organize something. And they use social media as a platform to get the information out. And long story short, 10,000 people showed up, and it was for 3 hours, sunny day. And the interesting thing about that was when you looked at the people in the audience, they weren't just people of the Afrocentric, if you will, community. It was people from all walks of life, as far as different racial groups, racial backgrounds. Because years ago, quote unquote, we'll say movements like that were facilitated by people that look like myself predominantly. But I think people now are starting to understand the purpose and the importance of this conversation, and not just keeping it in our homes, but making it go out to the public. But what's interesting, after that protest was done, a friend of mine was putting away some signs and getting some things together because she was wrapping up. And a woman walked up to her while she was putting some things in her car and said this, after she was getting some things together. She said, "This does not change anything. I'm still afraid of you." And this happened here locally in the city, right? So, we talk about Black culture, but I think it's also important that, and I think this is what you're trying to do as well, which is important, that we should respect Black lives just as much as we respect Black culture. And it's not just for Black lives, don't misunderstand me, but it's everybody that's living that's important. But I think we have to we talk about this idea of what's called music and the culture and the history behind it, as far as when people appropriate it. And what appropriation is, if you don't know, it's really taking somebody's community or culture and making money off it, profiting off it, and not understanding the ancestral lineage of that particular community and not recognizing where that information actually came from, the history. Like even with hip hop, I heard about a man named DJ Kool. He created what's called the language of hip hop because the record's going back and forth, the DJing on the turntable, right? So when you understand a little bit about some of the history of the information that's coming towards you, you know, you can have a better appreciation for people, generally speaking, right? So I think knowledge is really important, and it will help you make sense of what you're actually involved in, whatever area that you want to focus yourself in, whether it could be any kind of profession, but knowledge is critical in that.
Right. I think it's that transferable knowledge, and, you know, like you said earlier about listening to the youth, because if they're engaging in this way and speaking this language and we're just not picking it up because we just choose to be like distant from them, then like, yeah, there's no knowledge being transferred to continue this sort of movement forward. So yeah, that's very important. And yeah, I definitely appreciate all the knowledge that you're dropping so far. And we do have some questions coming in from participants and anybody that have joined the conversation in the last few minutes. We do have Mr. Leroy Hibbert here in the chat, and we do have some students. So please feel free to ask any questions you may have. And I think we can address one from Rob, any like recent experience of racism that you've had to deal with. I think for the most part, if we are, yeah, a person of color, then like, you know, we're obviously a little bit more prone to having to deal with that and maybe stand up to it or speak on the experience. So any advice to younger people experiencing racism, and what are some biggest takeaways as you had to encounter some of these in the recent times?
Well, racism, it's interesting because, you know, Socrates said this, he's a wise philosopher. He said, before anybody can discuss a topic, they have to first agree upon the definition. And so racism, very quickly, it's just it's a belief system that one race is better than another one. It's like a hierarchy of color, if you will. And so myself, I've experienced it personally. You know, I was actually doing a presentation at a high school locally here. And in the presentation, they wanted me to come and talk about Black history. This happened about no more than 3 years ago. So I won't tell you the high school nor the board because I don't want to embarrass the school or the board. But I went down there, did a presentation, and as I was on stage in front of about 400 high school students, a student in the hallway yelled out, "I don't want to listen to that N-word," while I was on stage. And students actually in the audience heard it. So I said to myself, and I paused momentarily, and I said, you know what? It's not important what people call me. It's only important what I answer to. And so I continued the presentation, came off stage. And then the principal, vice principal greeted me as well. And some students stayed by and I greeted them and they were very kind. Went back to the office and I went home. Well, a student from that high school called my house here. I did not give him my phone number, my local number, my landline, but he left a message, my wife said. So my beloved wife and I walked upstairs and got the message. And just to paraphrase what this particular student said, he said, "Leroy, I'm sorry." He said, "I'm in grade 12. And not all of us at our school believes what this one student said about you. If it's any consolation, please don't let this stop you from coming back to my school." He said, "I'm going to be graduating this year," not this year specifically, but the year that he left a message. He said, "I'm going to be graduating this year, but if you come back to my school, I'll come and listen to what you have to say." And so I called him back and I just said, "Thank you so much for checking to see if I was okay, searching for my phone number." I said, "I'm doing well." And I said, "If your school wants me to come back, I'll be happy to come back. No problem." I don't hate that student. I forgive that student for doing that. Forgiveness doesn't mean I appreciate what she did. It just means I'm not going to let what she did control my life. So I forgive her. And I don't hate her at all, but it's just symptomatic of what's actually going on in the world. So if things like that do happen to you personally, I mean, one of the greatest things you can do is actually reach out to others. Let people know. Don't necessarily keep that in, because you don't have to walk in this life alone. And I think it's important that we as a community, even if you're not necessarily from the racialized community, one of the greatest things you can do as they call it allies. But even that term now is being morphed into something else. But what's one thing you can really do is this, really important that we can do to each other, no matter what the issue is validate the person's experience. Whether you understand it or not, just validate it's coming from them, as opposed to re-victimizing them, where they have to prove this was actually a racist situation, right? Just validate the experience, honor the experience, and support the person involved in that experience so we can help as a community move forward. But when we start to point fingers and try to let them justify if it really did happen or if it becomes problematic, and then nobody will share anything anymore. I mean, so that's one thing that we can do as a community as well, and acknowledge it.
Yeah, that's very true. And I've heard an interesting quote over the last few months about how racism evolves with time. So, you can't say that even the experience, there are layers of it and how severe, and just blunt it could be. But when we speak on and when we, have learned more about the systemic, institutionalized like racism, especially over the last year, it just goes to show how many of us were just simply just unaware of a lot of these things that have been very problematic for hundreds of years. So when we start to take responsibility as a community to come together to address these issues and help acknowledge and validate each other's experiences, that I think is one of the first steps we can take to get that knowledge piece a little bit more solidified, to help with the foundation. And then from there, we can start to take action on like, where do we go from here now that we have the same kind of understanding when it comes to this work and that experience.
I mean, Jim, that's perfect. I think when we talk about racism, I don't want to leave the impression we're not talking about anti-whites. Anti-racism does not mean we're anti-white. We're against people that don't look like us. We're against racism, right? Because we need everybody to get their hands involved so we can uproot this thing. But at the same time as well, we don't want to be complicit in the sense that, people say sometimes, well, at least, Leroy, I'm not racist. I was never raised that way. I would never say those things. And I thank you so much for being that way, which is fantastic. But I think we need to move the needle a little bit further to be what's called anti-racist, because the opposite of racism is anti-racism. And I look at anti-racism as a verb as opposed to a noun. So it's something that when you're anti-racist means you actually intentionally oppose it, but then you're also building a healthy racial community as well, as opposed to just saying that, well, I'm glad I'm not like them or that country. Because I think if we're not careful in Canada, we'll dress it up with multiculturalism. And if we're not careful, we'll pride ourselves so much in being multicultural that we forget to be anti-racist in the multicultural environment.
Wow. Yeah, I'm just processing it all. And it's very valuable information. And I'm sure I'm not the only one when I say like a lot of these seem to be information that's been a little bit more readily accessible in the last like year, I would say, honestly, since the mobilization of the community with George Floyd and the Blackout Tuesday in the industry too. So like it became a lot more apparent that this was some real problems in the world that we all live in. So how can we just continue to be an observer of all these things, right? And I think the first and the most comfortable and convenient way is to point the fingers and to say, yeah, I'm not like that. I never done that. I never experienced that way. So you remove yourself from that sort of big picture and you don't even end up taking either side. But when it comes to doing the anti-racism work, yeah, like you really have to consider how you've been prior to you attaining this information, because like the way I was raised, let's say in a very traditional Korean home for my first 13 years of my life and spending the next part of my life in Canada experiencing multiculturalism, but like I never believed in racism right off the bat because it just had never occurred to me like in a way that we are understanding. But then I started to realize how big certain gaps are and how severe some of these instances have been and how much more of this conditioning that I've done over the years as I started to become a person of my own and like defining certain things, racism, you know, even tokenism, or even the appropriation of the culture. Like I've participated in all these things. So there's a lot of unlearning and just letting go of the old ways that I'm having to do. So I would also love to hear anybody else that's like in the chat, like if you had questions about this specific topic or directly for Leroy, please engage in a conversation. And I know we have some more questions from, I hope I'm saying your name right, is Kesha? I think she was interested in learning more about help cultivating the culture in the London community. How do we connect and educate? I do believe this is one of the ways that we can start doing that. And yeah, Ushin, Joseph, Joven, Jordan, any questions? Before you go, Joven, you got to ask a question.
I think you talked about a little bit, like, how long have you been going around doing these, like, speeches or talks?
Okay, how long I have been doing this? Yeah. Okay, so I was at I've been at LUSO for LUSO Community Services, the official name, for over 20 years. And then before that, about 3 or 4 years before that, I was doing similar work at another organization. So about over 20 years, I've been doing this. But I mean, it's wonderful because I get to meet great people like yourself. I'm always learning from you folks, which is great.
Oh, that's what the school is for. plenty of questions and students. And yeah, Jordan, I believe Leroy was at the school a couple weeks ago at Montessori. Maybe virtually. I did hear from a school out in Clinton that you had a presentation with I think St. Anne's this morning.
Oh gosh, yeah. You found out so quick, man.
Word gets out. Yes. Well, we had to track you down to make sure that you are available on Zoom. And we have any other, hip hop community can thrive within London. How do you think hip hop community can thrive? I would love to hear everybody's take on this too.
Sorry, what was the question?
How can we help the hip hop community in London thrive?
Oh, I think I mean, one of the great things that we're talking about is just this piece on education. It's interesting because it's how you educate as well and what you're educating with. Because, you know, it's interesting. There's a group back in the day called Public Enemy. And Chuck D he's a rap artist. He's a lead in that. And you have Flavor Flav back in the day in Terminator X on a turntable. And he said that it's interesting. With rap music, he said rap music is a black man's CNN. Because we have not been able to go in traditional arenas to talk about necessarily our story. So that's why a lot of times you hear it through our music. So education is really important as far as having things thrive in different communities and letting people understand what it's all about. Because you cannot live beyond what you've been taught, and you cannot have what you speak against. So it's a process about just getting people information so that they can get some sense of what this is all about. Because when you talk about hip hop, I think one of the first things people associate with hip hop is rapping, but that's what people do in hip hop. I think hip hop is, for the most part, it's almost like a culture in and of itself. And rapping is what you do within that. DJing is what you do within that. MCing is what you're doing within that. Graffiti is what you're doing within that. So it's a matter of just kind of letting people know some of the things that people are engaged in. Because there's a group, I know you probably know about this too, Jim, it's called one of the rap groups called Arrested Development. And there's a man named Speech. He has a song called Tennessee back in the day, or way back in the day called De La Soul. They're way back there. But or MC Hammer, MC Hammer was trying to do his thing, man, for a little bit. He tried to do his thing. But So, but there's so many different pieces to this sort of conversation. But it's like I said, just kind of letting people know a little bit about it and then just educating people. That may be a starting point anyway, and even just for yourself personally.
Yeah, I think we also debated on the title of, like, School of Hip Hop, because, like, if you call yourself a school, like, you gotta have just two things: someone to teach, someone to learn from. So, like, in that sense, you constantly have to search for that next piece of knowledge and then also share that. So, like, the point of each one teach one kind of came naturally out of movement with hip hop. But I think that's the essence of this series right here, for anybody and everybody to just share one piece of information, whether it's on the visual art, entrepreneurship, cultivating community. And I do believe that we all have the ability to spark that inspiration, but maybe some of us aren't ready to sort of feel confident behind that voice. I used to be, like, much more shy, like, in high school, but then even a year and a half ago, I wouldn't have felt as comfortable speaking, publicly, like online. But it really just was a matter of me putting myself out there, taking the risk, and just knowing that the knowledge that I'm seeking is valid, and also what I am internalizing myself is worth sharing too. So it's I feel very fortunate to have this connection with everybody that's part of the chat. And yeah, we got some more questions coming in. Positive changes you have seen over the past 20 years in your experience, I guess, whether from speaking, engaging with the communities at various roles and positions. And yeah, that would be very interesting to hear.
I think one positive change is that we're starting to acknowledge it. It's so interesting because when you talk about racism, people sometimes can get their backs up, where they think that you're accusing them of something. And so people kind of shied away from the topic. We're not like that. That's not for us. We don't have a problem. But in order to talk about, when you talk about anti-racism or race relation, it doesn't mean you have a problem. You're almost also being proactive and dealing with things that are actually right now in our communities. So people go to schools, but they don't necessarily live in schools. They live outside of the building. So when you prepare the students in the schools, they can focus and function better outside of the building that they're being educated in, because education is not necessarily culturally neutral. So one positive thing I've seen is just the acknowledgement. People are starting to recognize that, we should talk about it. And we can talk about it in a civil way. People may have different ideas, but we can still have a conversation about it and learn from people's experiences. Also, I see too as well representation, which is very nice. It was nice. I mean, years ago, 2008, Barack Obama was the first Black president. Maybe the last one, but he's the first one. But it's good that he did some things there, and that didn't solve the racial problems. Don't misunderstand me, but you're able to see something that you never saw before in history, and people were a part of it in this generation, which is, and in spite of, him being in there for 8 years, and his wife Michelle and daughter Sasha and Malaya, they're out of that system now, but it was just the moment. It was just something that people can mark in history and etched in their mind. They can probably realize where they were when they found out that he won, and then what happened after that. And so that was a really, really positive thing I noticed as well. Now, mind you, though, all Black people, as an FYI, this is like other cultures as well. All Black people don't agree on all the same things. We have some similar situations that we deal with and contend with, but we all have our different ways of seeing life as well. We all have our different personalities. But those are two major things that I found that was really interesting: representation, and also the acknowledgement of talking about the issue, which is really, really great.
Yeah, and like the two main ingredients, and then mixed with the knowledge. But, like, do you feel this is also where it gets a little bit tricky and challenging in really putting, the accountability and staying the course to actually get through the tough times, because now we know better. Now we are seen to be doing better. But like we said earlier, everything takes time, whether it's personal development, you know, or you're figuring out your calling or your passion. But to speak on these matters and speaking with organizations, I'm sure that are not just, you know, comprised of 3 or 4 people at a time, it of course is much more challenging when it comes to doing the work with the community on your back. So not to bring this out of the positive changes, I just want to maybe ask about how you can maybe stay focused on the big picture and continue to leave that inspiration behind for everyone to actually take more initiative.
Well, um, uh, it's almost as if for me, because when you do this work, you actually open yourself up to a lot of criticism as well. And that may come with the territory as well, because um, as much as you're investing in people, I see my responsibility is I'm here to inform people, not to change people. People change because they want to change, not because I make them to do that. But I give them some information for them to make the decision as far as what direction that they want to take, right? But I don't push people into any particular way. I just say this is here for you, and you can decide what information you want to do, where you want to go. But you also, in this work, I find that you have to wear people lightly, which means that there are people that will say some very nasty things on social media. Hope I'm answering your question. I may be digressing here momentarily, but they may do things that are not necessarily appropriate. For me personally, I don't believe in canceling people out. I believe in counsel and not cancel. I mean, Michael Eric Dyson suggested that. So if people do make a mistake, we also have to have grace with people and a little bit of mercy as well, and not dismiss them from society because of a situation or something they said that was inappropriate. It's kind of working with people so that they can get to a place where they feel comfortable in, because this is a new work, a new walk for everybody. I know for people like myself, for example, one thing that was really striking is one thing I try to help people we try to get away from is this term called being colorblind, or I don't see color. I'm a person, I'm a Black man, wide nose and thick lips. When you say you don't see color, and I know people's intentions may be pure, but people sometimes that are from racialized communities don't necessarily see the intent. We focus on the impact. So when you say to somebody that you don't see color, what you're saying to them is you don't see them. And people may say, well, Leroy, if I tell somebody if I see color, it's not being racist. Well, if you see color, it's not being racist, it's being realistic. It's what do you do with the color that you see that can cause people to be racist, right? So it's not about the recognition, because everybody wants to be recognized. It's about what people do with what they actually recognize and see, right? So we want to get this idea that it's okay to recognize people's differences as far as racially, we'll say. But when you put value on that difference, that becomes problematic. So recognizing the difference, it doesn't, we are all different, but it's just about what you do with the difference that you recognize. Now, did I answer that? Because I don't know if I did. But
that was a good answer, I would say. I think, yeah. No, definitely. And it is, you know, that sort of question where everyone needs to do the work, do the research to come up with their own definition of what kind of anti-racism work, anti-racist person you will be. Very similar to when we ask of our students when they enter the studio too, like, you're in a 509 School of Hip Hop. We're not here to, like, you know, just force feed, like, you know, jazz music, but hey, we got to talk about jazz music, how that influenced hip hop, because there's that lineage and there is that cultural context that is important to learn when you're consuming and learning more about the culture of hip hop. So I think when it comes to doing this work, there's, of course, there's the big objective goal as well, but there's a lot of the, I guess, personal experiences, and the subjective views that we have on the world. So that's why I think the conversation piece and starting to acknowledge one another and being okay to challenge like one another's views, like with the in hopes of counseling, yeah, not canceling. And I think that's very good thing that you mentioned too. So instead of a one-way street, it becomes a mutual sort of responsibility. And I guess I could
No,
speak on leadership as well from that. You just, if you believe in something and you know what to do, it starts with taking initiative to just take the first step for you to start making that momentum, and then others will follow. Same thing with, when you get inspired by someone who speaks as opposed to doing the actual work, so that there's tangible things that you can attach yourself to.
no, that's really important. It's so interesting. Last year, when a couple things. Somebody asked Will Smith, "Has racism increased?" He said, just paraphrasing his statement, he said, "No, racism has not increased. It's just being filmed. So people get to see what we've been talking about for years." But last year when we had what's called the whole idea of these protests, and people call them movements, and I understand where they're coming from, but I don't want to make it's not about a black and white issue. Please don't misunderstand me, because we have anti-Asian racism, anti-Indigenous racism. It just covers so many different areas, so many tentacles to this topic area. But with what happened with George Floyd, and people look at that as a movement. It's like, okay, we got this movement, but for myself, Black people aren't a movement. We're a people, right? And we're not necessarily the in thing now. And this is what you're doing here, which is great as far as having this conversation, because we're a year now beyond Mr. Floyd passing, but you feel it necessary to still talk about it, because his death still speaks volumes because of the injustices that are going on. And you don't look at this as a luxury. You look at this as a duty, which is amazing, and it's great that you're doing this in different sort of stages. But it's a process. And I think right now, people of color now, we don't want to just be seen, because I hear this phrase as well going out public. People say things like, and I understand what they're saying. It's almost as if when this all happened, we have these catchphrases that people say, "I see you," or "I see you," or "I see you," and "I see you," and I appreciate that. But I don't want you just to see me. I want you to understand me. I can see my television, but I don't know how it works, and I can just walk right by and dismiss it. But when you understand somebody, then you start to appreciate what you actually see. And I think when you understand somebody, that takes time. And that's a journey in what you're doing here as far as Zoom. But this idea of just seeing people, you can see all kinds of things, but we want to move just beyond seeing somebody to understanding them. Because then the next time you see them, you'll start to appreciate what you're actually seeing, because you had a conversation behind that. And I think that helps the process of building what's called healthy racial relationships with people.
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it sheds a lot of light on the way we take in the information and, really look at building healthy relationships in a different way. Because the external circumstances, for example, with something like the pandemic, having as a backdrop, it really influences the way we feel about just about anything and anybody. But when we start to put the power in the hands of, individuals and actually being able to connect, with authenticity, we can speak beyond that obvious virus that's around, and we can start to understand one another, on a more just deeper level, and that starts to affect the way we look at relationships. And it speaks volumes for everybody who's part of this conversation. I know many of you have joined us for whether it's crew-related chats or our Quarter Past Midnight series, where we just stay up late and just talk about time perception and this crazy things that have happened over the year 2020, with a lot of the excitement that was built up just before it. But to sort of kind of wrap up the conversation around mentorship, youth engagement, hip hop, social justice. What's one thing that you could say that the year 2020 taught you, that you look at as a very new piece of information that you just wouldn't have acquired if this COVID thing didn't happen? Sort of like the opportunity you had said yes to, in participating for speaking engagement way back.
One thing that I has somewhat, what this pandemic has done is almost amplify things that have already been in existence. One thing is just what's helped me is having patience. Patience. You only get patience by waiting, especially with technology. Learning how to use that to what's called spread the message out, and what you're doing here, and reaching a larger audience, which I've learned as well, which is wonderful. So just having patience with each other and where we are in our lives, supporting each other. And then also the thing that I learned as well is just with technology and just how to use that as a tool to get information out in a positive way, because it can be used as a destructive tool as well. But you're using it as a positive thing, because I think after this pandemic has, if you want to say, stopped, if you will, I think this piece of life will never go away. And so I think it's just a matter of using the platforms now to build, to help, to encourage, and to be there for those that are in need.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And there have been a lot of needs that have come to surface, especially in the last year, especially with related to like social equity, but the mental health as well. So being able to host these conversations for everyone to show up, just, open up themselves a little bit to let these conversations in, and, like you said, just build and just keep moving forward. So I appreciate everybody joining in today, but of course, especially Leroy, thank you so much for your time. But I would love to see if anyone wants to say anything on camera or type in the chat, or Leroy, if you have anything that you would like to just add to the conversation or any questions too. So please feel free to unmute yourself, show your face, say hello. I spilled some coffee, so I'm gonna try to get a piece of paper towel, but please, come on, don't be awkward now.
Hello, hello. I feel like my internet's a little sticky.
Hey.
But I just wanted to say thank you so much for all of the wisdom that you shared with us. My name is Louis. I do experience racism from time to time as well, although sometimes it's from the other way, saying, hey, you're not really Black, are you? So it's cool to get, all of this information and how I can appropriately manage it in the future.
Oh, awesome. Louis, thanks for being a part of it. It's good to meet you.
Cheers.
Awesome. Appreciate that.
Leroy, nice to meet you. I guess again, I've sort of met you at Montessori. I've had the chance to sneak in and hear you speak. I know you were at junior high, I think a couple weeks ago. One of the students in the background, his brother was actually there. So I just wanted to say, keep up the great work. I love what you're doing. And obviously what you're doing is impacting a lot of people, because I know when you're at the school every time, because the kids always talk about it. And I love that they talk about it and create that sort of awareness that's not just from the school or the teachers, it's someone outside who's, quote unquote cool, that doesn't enforce the rules or whatever on the daily. But it's awesome what you're doing. Just wanted to give you a big shout out and thanks for your time. That was amazing.
Thanks, Rob. Respect. Appreciate that.
Yeah, definitely welcome to come back. I know obviously COVID has our limitations, but it's always awesome when you come to the school and speak on these topics. And I like to say our school's sort of well informed on those topics, but it never hurts to have an expert like yourself come in and speak about true experiences, again, from someone that's not their teacher or like, enforcing the rules, someone that's outside and coming in that's a cool guy, so I think it's awesome.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate that. It means a lot.
No worries, man. you're too humble. It's all right to say, you know, like, oh yeah, you know, I do my thing, you know. You've done it for 20 years and I'm sure you've made a lot of changes. So it's awesome to hear. And I appreciate you telling that story about the high school, because kids seem to come to ask me about my experiences. And, you know, I can speak from my experiences, but, you know, because you're a familiar guy around my school, I can say, hey, you know, Leroy told me this story once, you know, like, I don't know if you remember Gabe and Abity from the school, but I talk a lot about racism with them at Montessori because I'm also adopted like they are. And I experience certain things that, you know, because I don't look like my parents. So it's always awesome to, again, have something to relate to of someone that they know as well. So I just want to thank you and keep doing what you're doing. It's amazing. And obviously everyone in here feels the same way. So keep it up, dude.
Appreciate it.
Anybody else? No? But I would love to grab a couple pictures of everybody on screen because this just doesn't happen a lot. Now we're trying to do everything like in person. So I miss Zoom meetings too, to a certain degree. But I'm going to take like 6. So feel free to switch up your poses. And okay, so also, I mean, this space is available for all of you here virtually in chat to come in to get that in-person experience, and we can literally speak on the very same issues in person, face to face, keeping our distance, to some good music while we get to learn and connect and share through hip hop. And it has been, you know, my passion and love for hip hop in the community that have led me to meet someone like Leroy. And you know, all of you that I have in this chat right now, I think kind of came from that medium of like hip hop, dance, breaking. So this speaks volumes on how hip hop can be used as a positive tool to create that action. And it really is up to individuals, but also uniting together for a common cause like this. So Leroy, once again, thank you so much for your time, all the words of wisdom. Thank you for all the participants. I will be going through this footage to do some edits, share bits and pieces of the information to a larger audience, as we talked about. But please, I always stress this, share your own experiences, like, you know, loud and proud. Like, this is not meant to be just kept within these boxes. You know, I do think that amplification comes from one person just starting that noise and just echoing one another. So let's just keep that momentum going. For those who are new to this circle of 509 School of Hip Hop, welcome, and we hope to see you again soon. Leroy, any last words?
Well, to wrap up, I'd like to say to all of you, have courage in anything that you do. And courage is not the absence from fear. It's the ability to operate in its presence.
Wow. That was amazing. I was like trying to like get it on camera. I'm like, no, I'm just gonna rewind it and watch it again. There were so many of these moments where like, oh, it's all just sinking in. But yeah, I will spend the rest of the evening and rest of the week to process and internalize all this information. Thank you all so much for joining in. And we do have some upcoming guest speaker series and some workshops on poetry, beat making, dance, and beyond. So please stay tuned. Please keep spreading the word, spread the love for 509 School of Hip Hop. Each one teach one. This is Jim, JFX, signing out. Thank you, Leroy, once again.
You're welcome.
We'll chat soon, my friend.
All right.
All right. Cheers, everybody.